So a warm welcome to the Wealthy Her Network and our Homegrown members. Homegrown is bringing together a community of business trailblazers, entrepreneurs and investors. And usually we do this in our private members club in the center of London, Marylebone. But over the last 8 weeks, we have been doing this virtually and had some great events and great different networks joining our community. And tonight we have our host, Sarah Matthews, as ambassador of the club with us today and hosting the great event with Wealthy Her.
Thank you, Joost. Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome. Quite literally, it's very warm here in London. We're delighted to say. Thank you so much for giving up part of your evening and coming to tonight's conversation. As Joost said, I'm very proud to be a member of Homegrown. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an investor, and I work as a strategic advisor stroke coach to business leaders. And I'm thrilled to be hosting tonight's conversation on how is COVID-19 changing the face of philanthropy. So philanthropy comes from the Greek word philanthropia, which I'm sure you all knew that. And it means kindliness, humanity, benevolence, love to mankind. And it's defined in the Oxford Dictionary as the desire to help others, especially through the donation of money to good causes. So the tidal wave that we've seen from coronavirus has brought with it a flood of system-changing impacts, and not least for the charities and social sector organisations. And as a trustee of a couple of charities, I'm very well aware of that. And their role as society's lifeline is now more vital than ever. So during tonight's discussion, you're going to hear about the changing landscape of philanthropy from the Wealthy Her Network's finance experts, as well as the celebrated Sean Sutherland, who's co-founder of A Plastic Planet. And the Wealthy Her experts from JP Morgan Private Bank and from Kleinwort Hambros are also going to offer a guide to making, managing and running philanthropic endeavours. So if you're looking for support, if you're looking for intel or advice, the experts are here this evening to help address your concerns and answer your questions. So the way this is going to work is in a minute, I'll introduce you to our experts, and then we're going to do a short Q&A where I'm going to ask them some of the questions that we've collected in advance as being the ones that everybody seems to have the most burning questions on their mind at the moment. And then we're going to hand it over to all of you to ask questions that you have. And as a result of that, we'll see where we get to, but we're looking to finish on time at about 7:30. What I would say is during the discussion that we're going to have to start with, if you have burning questions, don't be afraid to ask them, put them in the chat. And I'll monitor the chat as we go along so that we can keep it as dynamic and as live and as interactive discussion as we can. But as I said, there will be a proper Q&A at the end. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to each of our experts this evening and our special guest. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves and then we're going to go into some questions. So I'm going to start with Cheryl Fafaria, who's head of the Philanthropy Centre for Europe, Middle East and Africa for JP Morgan Private Bank. Cheryl, do you want to say something about yourself this evening?
Thank you, and I'm so grateful to Homegrown and to Wealthy Her for hosting this conversation, of course, for you, Sarah, to be facilitating it. So thank you very much. I lead JP Morgan's Philanthropy Centre for Europe, Middle East and Africa. And what that really means, kind of in a nutshell, is that I'm a philanthropy coach for individuals and families who are clients of the private bank on really just, simply put, how they can be more effective and more impactful with the funds that they dedicate to charitable causes. In a previous life, I spent many years kind of working for an investment bank, and I suppose kind of what compelled me to repivot my career was an upbringing in Kenya, and also a real passion for innovation and entrepreneurial approaches to reducing poverty and inequality and international development. I'll stop there, but I very much look forward to this conversation.
Oh, thank you very much, Cheryl. Now I'm going to hand over to Rebecca Constable. She's Director of Private Banking and Head of Newbury and Head of Philanthropy at Kleinwort Hambros. So good evening, Rebecca.
Hi, thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight. As Sarah said, my title is that I'm a director of Kleinwort Hambros, which is a private bank and wealth management business. And I've had the great pleasure over the last 30 years of advising private clients, private foundations and charities on managing their wealth. I think when I first started, it became very clear that if I was going to be any good at this job, not only did I have to understand finance and wealth, but I also had to understand what motivates my clients, what's their driver. And that has ended up by having some very, very interesting conversations over the years about how do they establish their legacy, what do they want to do when it comes to transferring wealth down the generations. So increasingly, that has involved the area of philanthropy. I now act as a sort of spokesperson for philanthropy for the bank. My aim is to promote it, to educate, and to learn. I'm clearly a philanthropist myself, and that I think is very important. Those who know me know that I don't accept things as they are. I don't accept the status quo. I want to change things. And therefore, it's fantastic to be part of this conversation this evening, because there is an enormous need at the current time, and it's wonderful that we all want to spend some time addressing the issues. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. And now coming on to our special guest this evening, Sian Sutherland, who's co-founder of A Plastic Planet. Sian, over to you.
Thanks, Sarah, and good evening, everybody. I hope you can all hear me clearly. So my name is Sian Sutherland, co-founder of A Plastic Planet. Absolutely least likely eco-warrior you will ever meet. Serial entrepreneur, so I've really been, many sides of a lot of fences. And my career has spanned so many different kinds of industries, from advertising to my first business, co-founded a Michelin star restaurant in Soho in London. Completely mad thing to do. Don't do it if you're ever thinking of it. But then I got involved in branding and marketing, and co-founded a skincare brand called Mama Mio. Any of you who are pregnant over the years may have seen it. Everything that I've ever done, I think the red thread that connects it is, how do you discover a niche in a market where you can create a very emotional connection and develop a unique language. And it was really as I was exiting the brand Mama Mio, selling that to the Hut Group, God bless them, that I got involved as an advisor to the board of a film called A Plastic Ocean. And I'm sorry to say, I had never even thought about what was happening to the millions of plastic bottles I was personally responsible for pumping out. But I had a very steep learning curve of what we have done to the planet, what we continue to do every single day. And I couldn't leave it alone. I couldn't not think, is there a way that I can use my marketing experience and my entrepreneurial experience to perhaps create a different kind of organization in this space of sustainability? I even hate using the word. So myself and my co-founder, Frederica Magnusson, created A Plastic Planet 3 years ago. And we wanted to be a very different kind of organization that was very pro-business, that was very solutions focused, because you can imagine as an entrepreneur, I believe in the power of business. And our first campaign was asking supermarkets for a plastic-free aisle. Some of you may have seen that campaign. It ran for a year. It took us a year to open the first aisle, which was in Amsterdam, had a lot of media attention, became a kind of symbol of hope and a catalyst for change within UK supermarkets. And since then, we've done a number of other things, like the Plastic Free Trust Mark, just launched our Sack the Sachet campaign, trying to eradicate the almost 1 trillion plastic sachets we pump out every year, but always doing it in a way where we work with the big multinationals like Unilever and Kraft Heinz. How can we accelerate the pace of change by bringing solutions? So that's the kind of organization that we have built. And it's great to have an opportunity to talk to all of you guys, because we couldn't do it without philanthropy. So we have a very strong opinion on philanthropy and measurables and all of those things. So I'm really looking forward to some of the questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Sian. Thank you to all of you for being here this evening. So we're going to kick straight off with the first question, which is around philanthropy and whether or not your definitions differ from what I've already said, and also how the landscape's changed in response to COVID-19. So let's start with Rebecca. Rebecca, can you talk us through what you define philanthropy as being, and how it differs from charity, if at all, And what does it mean to be a philanthropist, and how does one go about becoming one?
Brilliant. A large number of questions. So thank you, Sarah. I think to start off with this sort of difference between charity and philanthropy, I mean, I think the words are often used in the same sort of circumstances. But if one wants to sort of perhaps define a difference between them, I would say that charity tends to be more of an emotional outburst. It tends to be an outburst and a generous act, be it giving of money, giving of time, giving of expertise to sort of fix a problem that's happened. It might be, as we've seen the last 8 weeks in response to the COVID-19 and the NHS charities, the vast number of wonderful donations that have been made. So it tends to be a reaction to something like that. Whereas philanthropy, if one was going to differentiate it, I would say is perhaps more strategic. It's perhaps more about how can we get to the root cause of the problem? How can we fix that problem? I mean, just to give you an example, if we look at sort of malaria and the sort of the assistance to malaria, I mean, a good charitable act would be, donating pain relief to people who've got it, so money towards painkillers and that sort of stuff in Africa. So that, and wonderful as it is, the philanthropist might say, how do we stop this happening? How do we educate people? How do we set up programs so that we can stop the transmission of malaria? How do we understand about the sort of, and can we set up medical research problems? So it can be more strategic. And I think, that's one of the reasons why perhaps entrepreneurs, business people are fantastic philanthropists, because they want to solve a problem. They're good at problem solving and dealing with those issues. So, I mean, I think that's a sort of broad overview, I would say, about differentiating the difference between the two. What does it mean to be a philanthropist? I think that was the next question you asked me.
Yeah.
There are no two similar philanthropists. I mean, but it is a very broad spectrum of people. I think somebody said to me once, is philanthropy the prerogative of the wealthy? Can you only be a philanthropist if you are, extremely wealthy and able to give large amounts of money? I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, the current climate, finance is incredibly important, and financial donations are, extremely needed at the moment. But I don't think it is just about actually giving money. I do think that there are some amazing philanthropists out there that not just give money, but give time and expertise, and also connect people. I'm sure Sian can probably show some really great examples of that. The connectivity of people so that you can get to the root cause of the issue that you want to support. I certainly believe that philanthropy is a way of life. I think it's a way that you want to conduct your behaviour. And I think a lot of philanthropists, part of the pleasure that they get out of it is understanding the sort of the direction of, their purpose, actually. And that can also be something which very wealthy individuals find actually extremely satisfying. Because they say, I want my wealth also to be put partly to good use. I think it can be quite frustrating for philanthropists, because sometimes they don't necessarily fully sort of appreciate the outcome of some of the money that they're giving. And so that's something where I think the whole world of philanthropy needs to look at it and say, what is how can they reward philanthropists with information and knowledge to allow them to see the sort of success of some of the the donations they're making. Do tell me if I'm going on too long after this.
No.
You asked me 3 quite very important questions I can speak all night about. But how do you become a philanthropist? To become a philanthropist is basically a mindset. It's about saying, I want to donate, I want to give something both financially, but also potentially, as I said, time and expertise. I think it's very important to ensure that you focus on what causes you want to support. Some philanthropists, I think, feel frustrated because they haven't really done enough analysis on that side of things. And I'm sure that experts out there who advise philanthropists on how they give can enable them to sort of break that down into a sort of more focused approach. But I think, it's important to identify what causes you want to support. I mean, personally, I decided I wanted to support education, girls' education, sport in conflict zones, microfinance in Africa, and the homeless in the UK. I know those were things I felt deeply passionate about, and therefore I wanted to support as much as I could financially, but also giving my time and expertise. So I think it's important to identify that and then talk to people. Find out how you can best approach this whole cause. There are some wonderful people out there who advise philanthropists on, how they can actually put their desires into sort of very useful sort of ways of assisting in the whole sector. Have I answered your question?
You have indeed, very well. Thank you very much. And I'm really interested in the point, which maybe we'll come back to, about how you track the impact that any money you're giving as a philanthropist is having. Because what we're seeing is that a lot of brands are becoming philanthropists in their own right. And actually, some of them are using their leading edge technology to give feedback to the people who buy their brands and then contribute to whatever it is that the initiative is, and show them exactly where their money has gone. So maybe by brands getting involved, raising the standard. Okay, but thank you, Rebecca. Let's come on to Cheryl. Cheryl, how's the landscape changed in your world in response to COVID-19? Are people giving differently? Is there a sudden urge to donate and to help? Is it changing what people want to give their money to?
I think it's fascinating, actually, the conversations that we've had over the last kind of few months as the crisis has kind of unfolded. We're seeing a lot more conversations and commitments, really strong monetary commitments around philanthropy. And that's, I think, largely because our clients' lives have all been disrupted, just like all of ours, right? And, the nature and the immediacy of the crisis has made them really reassess their long-term and strategic priorities as individuals and as families. And, don't forget, they're physically sort of spending a lot more time at home. They're on the dinner table, just like mine here, and they're talking to their kids about what's really, truly important to them, because they're no longer kind of flying around on a plane, right? So philanthropy is often part of that conversation that gets brought up when you spend a lot of time, especially with your family and near such a kind of chaotic period where you're reassessing things and your priorities. Now, if I were to generalize, we've seen philanthropists go on a real journey from the initial kind of, let's call it sort of crisis type, disaster type, quick response mode, to now really pivoting and thinking about the longer term implications that will be left by this pandemic. So at the start of the crisis, they were making super quick decisions. They were plugging gaps where they saw that maybe the government response was a little bit lacking. They were providing food, support to the most vulnerable communities, the homeless, victims of domestic abuse, etc. And we certainly saw some amazing generosity at that time. And then as things started to unfold over the weeks and the months, increasingly, I think donors have started to recognize that this crisis is very much a marathon, but it's also a sprint. And yes, it's critical that we tackle the immediate emergency presented by COVID-19. But, we must also focus on the long-term systems, building and rebuilding those systems to be much stronger and better, to create the longer-term resilience and sort of strength that you need to also, protect against future crises. So that conversation change has been really tremendous to watch, especially amongst the very, very strategic philanthropists we work with. I guess sort of in the philanthropy center, I completely agree with Rebecca in that, trying to think about what causes you care about is really important. But also, I guess sort of just being connected to people, knowing sort of what everybody's doing out in the ecosystem is extremely important. And so the role that I guess we're starting to play is really just informing one another of progress, helping clients and others in the philanthropy ecosystem to really learn from what their peers are doing, their successes, failures, where they can collaborate more effectively. And then, you know, the other sort of thing that I think is really incredibly exciting is that we're also starting to see some brilliant conversations that are capturing this very unique moment in time where philanthropists are really beginning to ask, what does this mean for philanthropy as a discipline, as a practice, as something that I can keep on improving? So, you know, I think kind of probably a lot of us on this call will know that private foundations aren't really known for kind of pivoting really quickly, making decisions quickly. But, you know, when the first few signs of chaos appeared, actually that money got out the door really quickly. A lot of donors had to forego some of the kind of longer procedures and processes that they normally would have undergone to get that money out the door. And I think what's really exciting is that, you know, funders have now sort of agreed on these pledges that came as a result of the virus, but actually a lot of people are saying, well, hang on a second, these are just really good donor practices. Maybe we should just be doing them anyway in the normal practice, in the normal time. So they've been removing restrictions on some of the grants that they're giving. They've been, you know, being much more flexible, postponing some of the requirements that they're demanding of charities who are really struggling, as you've all said. Right now, they're listening more and trusting their charity partners and beneficiaries in a way that, you know, is really deeply meaningful at this moment in time. And I think, you know, that's an amazing conversation to be having, because I think a lot of innovation springs from adversity and times like this, but it is a very unique moment for these conversations to rebuild the systems for better philanthropy in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Well, let's come on to Sian now. Sian, from a recipient's perspective, can you share some insights about COVID-19 and how it's impacted philanthropy?
I think from our perspective, it's been really interesting to see a couple of things. And one is, I think everybody has been kind of shocked at how possible it is for us to change very, very quickly in a seismic way. Who knew that we could lock down half the world's population? Who knew that we could just not consume in the way that we have been consuming? So all of those things, I think it's been extraordinary that we've proven to ourselves that extraordinary change is possible. And only 6 months ago, if we had all said to each other, oh, by the way, for 8 weeks, we're all just going to be in our homes. Yeah, and half the planet's going to do the same. And every shopping center is going to be closed. And none of the things that we consider normal now are going to happen. We would never imagine that were true. So I think it's really heartening that we have proven to ourselves that extraordinary change by mankind is possible. The other thing I think has been fantastic through this, and it was interesting for us at A Plastic Planet, where the whole thing first happened, COVID-19, the lockdown happened, and we went into this kind of slightly stuttering fortnight of thinking, what is the right messaging for us? Because obviously we are a very focused, you know, our thing, ignite and inspire the world to turn off the plastic tap. And suddenly everybody is thinking about something totally different. And in that 2-week period, what was extraordinary was how the fossil fuel lobbyists, you know, the plastics lobbyists, particularly in the US, piled in, obviously thought it was Christmas had come early, and put plastic out there as the savior of mankind through COVID-19, which has no scientific backing to it whatsoever. So we very quickly realized this is not a time to be quiet. This is a time to choose your words carefully and your projects carefully, but it is more important than ever. And I think everybody, I'm sure everyone on this call, what has happened is that we have become more aware, more acutely aware of the fragility of our economic systems, our societal systems, and definitely our environmental systems, and the very connectedness of all of those systems. So I'm now tremendously optimistic that the little hiccup that we had a few weeks ago with you know, the EPA, the Environment Protection Agency in the US, lifted all restrictions on any kind of pollutions. You can pump anything out into the rivers right now in the name of COVID-19. So lots of backward facing things happened right then, but I think that we're going to make that ground up very quickly. So I feel people are now thinking, if we need to do more dramatic changes in future, we can do it. And that gives me huge heart. And I look at some of the cities and the changes that they're adopting. Obviously, we've just had the news that London is going to become one of the cycling and pedestrian capitals of the world. That just fills my heart with joy. That how long would it have taken for that to happen? But right now, they're going to fast track it, and it's going to happen very quickly. Milan, 35 kilometers of their inner city roads are dedicated now to cycle lanes and pedestrians. And their words were, we used to call this Plan 2030. Now we're calling it Plan 2020. So I love that this massive acceleration in what is possible is happening. And then the final one for me is Kate Raworth, and many of you will know, you're in the financial world and economists, I am sure, but the new model of donut economics that Kate Raworth has been working on for many years. And it's all about no longer focusing on unsustainable growth as being the model and the impact that has on not only the planet and planetary resources, but also on ourselves, because we're simply stealing from our kids' future. But that donut economics model just focuses on thriving. How can we as humans thrive with more equality? So I love how this impacts everybody. This, whatever you are thinking of in your philanthropy, that donut economic model fits into it really well. And Amsterdam have just announced that they're going to rebuild their economic model based on donut economics. And little bits of news like that, I think, should give us all huge heart. We're going to see tremendous change. And philanthropy has to be a major part of that. Can I just add one little thing? I loved what Rebecca was saying. I've never heard anybody describe the difference really between charity and philanthropy. And obviously as an entrepreneur, philanthropy is the way that my mind works. It has to be about measurables and metrics and KPIs. So it was really interesting to hear that that's the real differentiator between the two. And one is perhaps a little bit more impulsive and emotional, and, you know, like, I don't know, comic relief. And the other is more strategic and focused on, let's get to the nub of the problem. And that for me is absolutely what we need to do far more of. So, you know, if that is what philanthropy is, I'm very glad that you're doing what you guys are doing.
Thank you, Sian. And that leads beautifully to, I guess, the next question, which is, if it is more strategic, then how do businesses best go about deciding where their support goes? Can you give a few examples of that? Like, how do you decide?
Who are you asking?
I'm coming back to you, Sian, for that.
Oh, great. Oh, me again. It's been very interesting for us because this is a brand new world for me. You know, suddenly doing public affairs and lobbying Westminster and trying to create new laws and all of this. You know, I'm an entrepreneur. It's a whole new world for me, and it's been fascinating taking my old experience and seeing how relevant it can be in this world. And one of our funders, actually a Norwegian funder, they always measure the impact of their philanthropy. They use an external agency. It's extreme. There's a huge amount of due diligence with it. And when this first came up, I was a little bit scared, to be honest, because I had no idea how we would measure up against any of their other philanthropic investments. And they think of them as investments, and I do too. I think of it now that I used to sell stuff, and now I sell change. So how do you measure that? And they rang me actually just before Christmas and said, okay, we've got the results. And to be honest, what we normally look at is we can get a 1-to-1 ROI on our donations, then that's okay. If we can get 1.5 to 2, we're pretty happy with that. But we've never seen numbers like this. We're getting 9 times impact on the money that we give you. And that for me was like, that was news of the year, because the fact that I knew that there was a metric it was a proven case study of showing exactly what we were achieving. Because when I talk to potential funders, I talk about KPIs, I talk about measurables and impact, and you know, our 4 action pillars and all of these things, just exactly the same as if it's a business. So if any of you are thinking about philanthropy, I highly recommend that model, because I think it keeps us on our toes. And it's really fair. Of course, I'd say that because we did quite well. But it's a really good discipline for us. This money has not just fallen down from heaven. This money is hard earned by somebody somewhere. And I value every single penny that is ever given to us in a philanthropic capacity. And I have to make that money work exactly the same as I do with my entrepreneurial hat on. And the good thing about entrepreneurs is we know how to make shit happen out of nothing with no money, and pivot very quickly in moments like this. So that it's another perhaps thought for you all, is if you're thinking of putting your money with somebody who has an entrepreneurial attitude, rather than perhaps coming from, you know, the lineage of charity, where they really don't know any other disciplines, then perhaps that's an advantage and an opportunity for you.
Thank you, Sian. Yes. Interestingly, I was reading a report online that was saying there is a blurring of the lines because philanthropy is becoming more strategic. Maybe it's, you know, a lot of charities do amazing work, but maybe it does raise the requirement and the expectation to think more strategically and as an entrepreneur would. Thank you. So, Cheryl, I'm going to come back to you a moment. Are there any examples of philanthropy and philanthropic efforts that have really impressed you throughout this period, or perhaps just before? But yeah, can you give us some examples that you'd like to highlight?
Yes, lots and lots of amazing, impressive work. But before I do that, I just wanted to kind of come back to Sian's point there. I love what you said. I used to sell stuff and now I sell change. And I think that's an incredibly powerful way to put what you're doing, actually, because there isn't always enough appreciation for the fact that that change can be measured and can be very, very equivalent to real stuff. So well done you. And actually also, you know, from the business kind of landscape, we've seen some super impressive efforts by really kind of well-established businesses and startups alike, actually, just really trying to do their part. So some are repurposing themselves to create PPE, some are providing hand sanitizer, but they used to do beer, and, you know, it's just, yeah, it's really mind-blowing. In terms of your real question here, has anyone really impressed me? Look, loads of philanthropists are coming together in a really extraordinary way. You know, in terms of global figures, over $10 billion worth of new commitments towards COVID-19 have been committed around the world, which I think kind of points to that extraordinary effort globally. And a lot of philanthropists are incredibly inspiring, but if I had to pick one, and I know he sounds kind of obvious, but it would probably have to be still Bill Gates. The Gates Foundation have, you know, they've always taken an extraordinary kind of leadership role in the public health domain, and now even more so. You know, back in 2015, it feels like Bill must have had a bit of a crystal ball, because he specifically raised the issue of how unprepared the world was for the next pandemic. And of course, now his foundation has committed more than $250 million to address COVID-19. And not only that, they've kind of repivoted their entire operations, which unfortunately means sacrificing some of the work they're doing on malaria, TB, etc. But they're really drawing on the wealth of their expertise and their experience in the public health domain, dealing with Ebola, the science, the education. And also, I think what's really new about this is that they are truly trying to partner and collaborate with everybody. So, you know, sort of beyond the numbers also, I'm just really impressed with their efforts to try and sort of bring people together around drugs, diagnostics, therapeutics, tools to get us out of this mess through maybe a vaccine. And also because they've really raised the conversation level to appreciating that this is going to be really tricky for low and middle income countries. I think a lot of the philanthropy that we've seen so far has been extremely local or sort of very domestic to wherever the philanthropist has been based, because, you know, it feels like the problem is right there on our doorsteps, right? But you know, this is going to have an incredibly, this is going to have a devastating effect in some cases for a lot of countries whose health systems are particularly fragile, and the Gates Foundation has really shone a light on that aspect in Africa, in South Asia, and thinking about the most marginalized, most vulnerable. So I respect them immensely for raising the conversation on that too.
Thank you. I'm just going to quickly come to Rebecca and ask her if there are any examples that she wants to share. I'm mindful that time is marching on and we want to leave some time for questions. There's a few other things we want to cover, but just quickly, Rebecca, any examples that you'd like to highlight?
I just actually wanted to make a slightly different point, which is around just the vulnerability of, you know, the sort of charitable sector. And I think, as Sian said, you know, overnight we're changing, but I think we're also aware that how overnight some charities, are looking as if they're not going to survive. They haven't got the right sort of financial background to be able to sort of carry on. The cash flow isn't there. I mean, I think this is the National Council of Voluntary Organisations said that literally in 12 weeks, charities are set to lose £4 billion, and the government's put about 750 million to the not-for-profit sector. So what I just really wanted to say was, I think some of the things that are really necessary, and we've sort of slightly covered them as well on other areas, is things like restricted versus unrestricted giving. If donors can actually give unrestricted, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not giving to the causes that they want to give to, but sometimes if they're quite restricted, those gifts, it means that in times when charities do have to adapt, it's much more difficult for them to help those causes that they really need. And I just think, at the moment, it is a time where, there's going to be a lot of charities consolidating because the smaller ones just aren't viable anymore, a bit like we're seeing in the business world. And we need to work with the sector to make sure that it is able to continue to support all those wonderful causes that they're out there to do. So I'll stop there, but thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's really helpful, and also deeply concerning for those charities that are at threat of not being able to continue, and obviously all the human beings that they serve. Which I suppose brings me to our next question. We're here, courtesy of Homegrown, of course, and Wealthy Her as an organisation, which both yourself, Rebecca, and you, Cheryl, represent. And so what would be really useful to hear is why the organisation, if you want to talk a little bit about it and its rationale, and also the work you do, because clearly you work to guide people in philanthropy. So what is it that you bring to the party? I know it may sound obvious, but in preparing for today, people were really curious. They were like, well, why wouldn't I just go and find a cause that I'm interested in and see how I can help? Why do I need a middle person? And I know it's so much more complex and it's so much richer than that. So perhaps, Rebecca, you'd like to kick off, and then I'll come back to Cheryl.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's absolutely a great pleasure to be part of the network. I think any organisation where their sort of mission is to enhance the economic empowerment of women is going to get my attention. I mean, I've been working in this world for over 30 years. And what I think is so special about the Wealthy Her Network, and we're really pleased with JP Morgan and others to be, one of the 13 founding partners, is that, we are all partners in the financial world, and we're all working collaboratively to look at areas and ways in which we can educate women and give women the confidence to understand finance, to give them the flexibility and the choices that they need. And I think, that's all those sorts of desires and missions are things that I feel very, very passionately about. And it's great to have a whole group of us all together. It's a lot of fun. And, we're setting up pledges where we commit to having conversations with women. I personally committed to having 100 conversations with women this year about financial independence. This is great because if we can set the scene, as we've mentioned very briefly, there's going to be this enormous transition of wealth that's going to happen over the next generation. And, a significant proportion of that, 60% plus, is going to go into the hands of women. And women don't typically, they're not typically the ones that feel comfortable about talking about finance. So this is a great opportunity for us all to work together.
Thank you. And coming to you, Cheryl.
Yes, I mean, look, I would echo everything that Rebecca has said. We are enormously proud to be part of the Wealthy Her Network. Sort of through our own kind of initiatives, we're very focused on sort of, particularly expanding women-run businesses, improving women's financial health, because I think that I agree with you, sort of focusing on financial acumen is an absolutely key part. And also empowering women's career growth. We're sort of a firm that kind of we've got over 250,000 people globally, and we recognize that, women are a huge and important part of our own firm, but also if we can work together in collaboration, with others, founding partners and everybody in the network at Wellesley Her to promote the same shared vision, then we are absolutely in the game. So, so hopefully we can all move further faster together. And in terms of sort of why someone would maybe want to work with somebody who's a philanthropy advisor, you know, I think it comes back to what Sian was talking about earlier, which is that this is kind of, you know, philanthropy is like not kick away dollars. This is hard earned money that someone somewhere has really spent some time creating. And I think we have a real responsibility to spend it wisely and for that money to be treated with the same level of rigor and discipline that we treat our businesses with, that we treat, you know, anything that we're spending money on. And this is even more important because we have a responsibility to the communities that we serve. So if you know, in terms of sort of the way that we, and I'm sure, you know, sort of the way that philanthropy advisors generally sort of help clients, and certainly we do in the Philanthropy Centre, it's really sort of, to Rebecca's point earlier, spending a lot of time with them at the beginning, helping them understand and articulate their values as an individual or as a family, trying to help them reflect those values into a concrete and rigorous philanthropy strategy that can really sort of be meaningfully executed through the right advice and partnerships on things like what structures you might use, or, you know, how can we help you to understand what best practice grant making and monitoring and evaluation look like? Where are the innovations coming from? Where are the really cutting edge philanthropists we can, you know, connect you to all around the world so that you can work together and kind of shortcut some of those annoying little failures that everybody goes towards. So, you know, really, I guess the biggest thing for us is just helping, and what you should all seek from your philanthropy advisors is really just, you know, that best practice and that connectivity, the collaboration that could help you move further and faster to achieve your goals and get the impact that you want.
Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, I have a final question for Sian, but I'm going to leave it till the end, and I'm going to see if anybody else asks it. Given that we have a little bit of time now for Q&A, who would like to ask the question? If you want to unmute yourself or put your digital hand up if you know how to do that, please, we'd love to hear from you. Any takers? Stunned everybody into silence. I've got a question that's come through to me in private chat, which is, what would be the minimum amount somebody could invest in philanthropy, ballpark? Is there anyone that would like to take that?
I wouldn't say there is a minimum amount. I mean, I think, you know, this is what it comes down to, is that sort of it's down to the motivation and what the cause is that you want to support. Often, if philanthropists want to try and get traction, a very good way of doing that is what we call match funding. So an individual will give a seed donation and will say, okay, for X amount that's raised, I will double it. In fact, I've seen situations, I mean, a very good example here, a local sort of charity that wanted to raise money for a dialysis unit in the hospital, and a whole centre that was then ended up being created. And they raised a certain number of hundreds of thousands locally, and then it was doubled by foundations. So that whole match funding can be incredibly powerful. So I don't think there's really a minimum sum that I would say. It's more about the energy, creativity and connectivity that you can bring with that donation.
Oh, thank you. And moving on from that, there was another question. What are the barriers to becoming a philanthropist, if there are any?
I mean, that's a great question, because, you know, I feel like actually in the last kind of year or two, we've seen quite a few kind of attacks on philanthropists in the media, just really kind of as a result of a lot of their sort of narratives around, you know, sort of what's their motivation behind their philanthropy, sort of, you know, are they doing it to further political goals? Is there some sort of a, you know, kind of a stigma attached to being someone who saved somebody and doesn't necessarily see them on an equal footing. There's quite, you know, you can kind of, yeah, it's everything under the sun, actually. But I do think that it comes down to just, you know, how impactful are you with that money? That there are lots of ways of being impactful, and coming back to the last question also around kind of leveraging your philanthropy and using it as a catalyst for others also to be in the game. I think it, you know, it doesn't matter how much you are giving, but there are so many different ways that you can contribute to a solution by also, you know, using what you have, your knowledge, your experience, your volunteering skills, whatever it might be, to prompt more of a response from outside, so that you can, you know, sort of make your solution much more than the sum of its parts. And I think, you know, with respect to sort of the barriers, there are lots of barriers to sort of giving, but talking to people about how to remove some of those barriers can be useful. I think a lot of people think that they have to start a foundation to be a philanthropist. That's not true. You know, many of us have donor advised funds. I mean, I have a very small pot of money that I give every year. I'm by no means kind of equaling the likes of the clients that we serve, but every year we use it as a strategic opportunity to sit down for 2 hours, my husband and I, my family, to sit down and think really hard and strategically about where that money is going to go. And I think that that's the key, really, is to Rebecca's point earlier. It's the intention and the motivation to do something rigorous and something thoughtful and meaningful with that money that makes you a good philanthropist.
Thank you.
One very quick point there. Sorry, you're going to.
Yes, sorry, Rebecca, go on.
I was going to say, I think you actually raised a really important point which we haven't covered tonight, which is, you're so right, Cheryl, you don't need to set up a foundation or a charity. You know, the trustee responsibilities around setting up a charity are extremely onerous. Some individuals really want to do that because they want to get the next generation involved in the charity as trustees, and it's really part of their legacy, and it's fantastic if they do that. But there are what we call donor advised funds out there, which are bank accounts that are charitable accounts. So you actually put your money into that account and you've made the charitable giving. And then you can decide exactly how what you want to do with that money once you've actually put it into that account. And, you know, those are very flexible. And so that, you know, that could be a barrier to philanthropists. They say, well, I haven't got enough money because I don't want to, you know, set up a charity, or I don't really want to have to deal with all the responsibilities that a charity trustee has to do. You don't need to do that. There are some other really easy ways of going about that problem.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, so we have 3 questions here, and they're all linked, and they also very conveniently link to the question I was going to ask Sian anyway. So Sian, so there's a question here around brands, and there are 2 dimensions of this. One person has asked, Melanie has asked, as not-for-profit becomes more business focused in terms of tracking impact, do you think businesses will have to become more philanthropically minded with their purpose and their wider impact on society and the environment? So hold that thought a minute, because the flip side question was, brands have been using philanthropy to further their consumer engagement and loyalty, for sure. And is that still valid, or are people more skeptical? So I guess what we're saying is COVID-19 going to take us more in the direction of brands being philanthropic, or are consumers going to reject that? And then there's a next question. So if we answer that, we'll come back to which really links to your point about donut economics, which is, if we have reduced consumption, what do we do to reconcile that with a global economy that has been shut down? And I see that they're very much inextricably linked. We're here to hear from you, so I'd be fascinated to see how you want to answer those questions.
Great. I had a brilliant expression last night, actually, which was, if we've lost a third of our economy, let's make sure we lose the dirty third. And I thought, that's such a simple way of looking at it, and never get it back. You know, let's just take this moment to do some really different things. And I think that we always ally anything to do with being sustainable or green or philanthropic is nothing to do with business and growth and success. And that's where we've gone wrong. that we think these two things are mutually exclusive, and in fact they're so intertwined. And that's what I love about donut economics, is it really understands that, but it does it, from an Oxford economist perspective, very pro-business. So the whole thinking about brands, and obviously we've for the last 2 decades, I think we've lived in a world where brands have just badged. I did it when I had Mamma Mia. Look good, feel better, amazing cancer charity. We gave 10% of all our profit. I determined what that profit number was. It was absolutely marketing. We didn't mean it, but it was marketing. And we have definitely moved from that being acceptable by your customers now. That's no longer okay. I think the new industry model, as we emerge from this, is going to be much more based on a B Corp. And I'm sure all of you know about B Corps, they have a triple bottom line, and it's people, planet, profit in that priority. And actually, at A Plastic Planet, we are a pending B Corp, because eventually we have to be self-sustainable. We cannot exist forever on philanthropy. And every one of our supporters is keen to know, we're interested in social entrepreneurship. How can we make A Plastic Planet self-sustainable? What can we help you create so that's the model going forward? So for me, the B Corp, I think we will see a huge amount more B Corps. And that really is the merging of, I do it because it's the right thing to do, and I do it because it's a marketing initiative. Suddenly the B Corp combines all of those things in a really good way. So some examples of B Corp for anyone who don't know them, it would be Ben & Jerry's, one of the first B Corps, Tom's Shoes. So they're the ones, and you can tell already they're brands that they have a value way beyond their top line, bottom line, because they have that aura. They are love brands because they mean so much more. So I love this movement of brands that don't just have purpose or philanthropy or donating or charities as a little CSR thing. That I hate CSR. We should banish it immediately. It's like the word sustainability, absolutely worthless. If it's not at the absolute heart and soul, the center of the brand, this little soul cell at the middle of the brand in the business, then it's only marketing. And we've all seen it, and I think everybody is becoming very, very aware of it now. And we're cynical. Shoppers are cynical. So when we see that kind of thing now, we don't believe it anymore. And when you see a brand where you believe it goes all the way through and it came from that passion at the beginning, then I think we recognize it. Shoppers are super savvy. So I think that's a fantastic development that we will see going forward, the growth of the B Corp. It's much newer in Europe than it is in the US, but it's getting a huge amount of traction. And it's not about charity. You have to earn a minimum of 50% of your revenue in an earned competitive space, because what they didn't want is just to have a whole load of do-gooding charities, non-profits, calling themselves B Corps, because suddenly we're not proving that business can be good and do good. And that is the new model, is those two are not mutually exclusive.
And if I may just add to that a little bit from what we're seeing in terms of kind of client interest in sustainable investing, it's amazing to see that actually just there is a real appreciation for the fact that, a well-governed company that has great environmental policies, great social policies too, towards society, is leading to higher quality sort of, growth opportunities in the investment world as well. And I think that's just testament to how these two things can be extremely linked in a way that we don't just think of CSR in a really vacuumous kind of, it's just an addition to the core business, but actually there are real benefits to including brilliant environmental, social and governance practices into the core operations and strategy of your business.
Yeah, I agree, Cheryl. And I think it's the founder of Patagonia said, the more sustainable I am, the more I protect the planet, the more money I make.
There we go.
That's the message everybody needs to hear.
I agree.
Rebecca, I just want to see whether you want to come in on the end of that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of thinking something rather deep about, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to have philanthropy, because business was philanthropy. Business had so much entwined it, in the same way that we don't want to talk about CSR and sustainability, but, it is absolutely at the core of what we do in the financial and in the business world, is around all these issues and values that we all think are so important. And, I think that comes from the employment world, getting people back into jobs who perhaps, have got some difficulties, both through mental health, getting people with mental health issues into the financial services industry, all sorts of issues that, suddenly become just part of what we do. And so, and I think one of the things I have noticed enormously over the course of the last few weeks is that people are always saying, how are you? There's this belief now. I mean, I don't remember in the 30 years I've been working that, the chief exec has often said, how are you all? Now everybody does. And I think it is changing our motivation. It's changing what we do, because it's important. If people aren't well, people won't perform well. And I think that gets to the core of organizations. And then hopefully we'll then derive the values and how we want to do things to be much more in line with some of these causes that need to be dealt with. And, I think it doesn't just become a stovepipe, it's absolutely in the core of the organisation.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody. I'm sure you'll agree it's been very informative and educational hearing from our speakers this evening. We're very grateful to you. And if I may wrap up by saying that I think what we've seen in general society is this outpouring of kindness, of more community, of more collaboration. And whilst COVID-19 has had a devastating impact, it has forced us to think about what's really important. And from what I've been hearing tonight, we are seeing the rise of authenticity. And rather than our charitable giving and our philanthropic efforts being down as a result of COVID-19, we're likely to see an increase, because that's the direction that we need to go in. I don't think I've seen a survey yet that has shown a figure of less than 80% for the number of people who don't want to go back to how things were before. And so, to quote Giles Hutchins, who's been a speaker for us at Homegrown in our next Era of Enterprise series, what if we go back to this being the new natural? Because what we had before wasn't normal. And I think we are all agreed on that. So thank you so much. We've come to the end of the time. Thank you to Rebecca, to Cheryl, and to Sean, our guest speaker this evening, and to all of you for giving an hour, and of course to Homegrown for hosting us. Thank you very much. If you look in the chat, there are details of where you can find more information should you wish to do so. Have a lovely evening, and we hope to see or speak to you very soon. Stay well and take care. Bye-bye, everybody.